Hello, everybody, and welcome to Good Cop 2.0, the podcast. I have no original ideas for names. I'm like the worst at marketing.
I wouldn't say that.
I call things what they are.
Exactly. That's the best way.
Yes. And in the studio with me right now is Jeannie Cameron, who is the managing director of JCIC International. And for those of you that don't know, probably, in my humble opinion, the world leading expert on FCTC that is willing to talk to everybody. I think that's
very nice.
Yeah, because I would say, I wouldn't just say talk to us. I think you would be open to speak to anyone that had questions,
Yes.
regardless of what side they're on.
Absolutely. Happy to talk to anyone. And back in the day, I used to go up and talk to FCTC delegates and their governments and the others, but they don't really talk these days. Although I have to say at this COP, I've not even tried yet.
No, I find that they're, like, from my perspective of coming into this and kind of seeing it after, I think it was India, I understood what COP was because of A Billion Lives, and that movie really, for someone in vaping, made me understand, whoa, there's a government body that's telling my country what to do, and they're secretive. And that's when I started getting a little bit interested in it. But if you could just go back and just explain to everybody why this was created. Because I know I came to you and I said, I want it defunded. And you explained to me why that's not the right thing.
Yes, certainly. Well, if you go back to the late 90s, that was the genesis of the start of the FCTC, because there was a woman called Ruth Romer who won the Time magazine's one of their awards for sort of raising issues or something like that. And she was against smoking, which and she was a very significant advocate for reducing smoking at the time. And she went as an advocate to the WHO and said, I think you should invoke Article 19 of your WHO constitution and create a treaty. And the WHO said, oh, no, we don't want to do that. We've not got a treaty. We don't want to do a treaty. And she and others pushed on the WHO to actually take up this idea. It took a couple of years, and I think it was the fact that the Prime Minister of Norway, who was then Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was then the former Prime Minister of Norway, who actually decided that, yes, the WHO's focus has been on infectious diseases, malaria, smallpox, eradication, all that. Let's look at a non-communicable disease, which is in mental health, that section of the WHO, and look at creating a treaty. And that's how it all kind of started. So by the late 1999, early 2000, the genesis of it was there. And I came into the picture in 2001. And I remember going for this job, and there was this new thing that was the FCTC, and I couldn't pronounce it. I kind of get the letters mixed up. Because it hadn't really been developed then. And I went for this job interview because I had a background in treaty law, and I'd worked in the international legal section of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. I just had a baby. I was living in Paris with my husband, and we decided we didn't want to go back to Australia, but we wanted to stay in Europe. So I needed a job. I had a British, citizenship. We could live in the UK. So I went for this job, which was at BAT, and because they needed someone to help them understand this new treaty that was going to be start to be negotiated. And I went, oh my God, I don't want to work for a tobacco company, because I'd actually in Australia worked for the equivalent of Ash in one of my first jobs, who did all the truth and ad campaigns against the tobacco companies. And I was like, oh my God. But I thought, on the other side, I need a job, and if we're going to stay in Europe. So I went for the interview, and to my surprise, it was very different to what I thought. And I was ready to take the job on the basis that I didn't have to have people smoking near me, because that was what the policy was, and also that I was very insistent that if there was a view that, you know, tobacco companies were saying smoking doesn't cause cancer, and if they were saying that, I didn't really feel I could be part of it because I knew that it did, and they were very open that it does. And so I thought, okay, I need a job. I need to get there. And so I took this job, and I was at BAT for 10 years, leading all of the international work on the FCTC, which was developing over the first 5 years, and then went into the various COPs and things. But I was mostly, I would say, educating the employees around the world on how international treaties work, how this was likely to impact, and how constitutionally each country that they were operating in would interpret it and put it into effect. So it was a brilliant 10 years that I was there, and I learned a lot about it. And, you know, I went on to cover the protocol on illicit trade and various other things. So, you know, to go back to how it all started, it had very much an intention to prevent smoking. It mentioned, you know, cigarettes was the main focus. It was prevention from exposure to tobacco smoke. And one of the things I mentioned yesterday was, if you look at the preamble to the treaty, and the preamble is what is used in treaties to look at the object and purpose, like what are we trying to do here? And, you know, some of the things people forget that are in there that are really important. No mention of nicotine, no mention of any of these things. It's all about smoke and cigarettes. And I think that was the object and purpose of the treaty, which was to prevent death and disease from cigarettes and smoking. And, you know, just looking at one thing in the preamble, the parties to this convention are deeply concerned about the escalation in smoking and tobacco consumption, particularly smoking at increasingly early ages. Every one of the things relates to smoking. It mentions cigarettes, exposure to tobacco smoke, smoke, all the way through it. And, you know, it's moved away from that, as we see now 20 years on, that the WHO and powers that be have wanted to prolong its existence and moved it well away from where it started. So to go back to your original question, it started out, in my view, with a very good intention to reduce exposure to tobacco smoke, reduce the consumption of cigarettes and tobacco consumption, and it has moved a long way from that now. But I think the actual document itself, like I said to you, is actually a very good document, because when you read all the things I've just been mentioning about protection from smoke and you know, the problems with cigarettes and the harms that come from that, and also all of the human rights in there, that people have the right to the highest attainment of health that they can achieve, and it invokes the World Health Organization's constitution, which provides for people to have good public health. It invokes the 1966 convention, International Convention on Civil and Political Rights and Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which all once again embrace people's human rights to choose. To all of the human rights that we have all come from those two 1966 treaties. And this treaty, FCTC treaty, draws on that and reminds people of that. And it actually opens with, the parties to this convention are determined to give priority to the right to protect public health. So the FCTC itself is not wrong. It also includes tobacco harm reduction as being equal to supply and demand reduction. The problem is the way governments have interpreted it and how they implement it based on pressure from the WHO. So the document isn't a problem, Maria. I don't think it is. And I think if anyone tried to change it, we wouldn't get what this document is today, because it's actually a good document for harm reduction. It's just convincing governments to use it and use the words and the rights that are in it to bring about what is where we now are at. And just to say one other thing, it says also that as that it's determined that the parties are determined to promote measures of tobacco control based on current and relevant scientific, technical and other considerations. So why are they not considering the current science and evidence that is there now for reduced risk products? Because that's what 193 governments agreed in this document. It's all there.
It is all there. And when you think about that document and when you think about the external pressure, and again, this is from someone who's just learning. So I'm just coming into this very fresh. And as I said in one of my panel discussion, it's all about learning. The more educated you are on a topic, the more confident you are in engaging. I think
that's a very important point that you made.
And I think that's where our success in Canada lies, is our learning. And I think that's something that, it's either instilled in you when you're younger or you instill it to others as you get older. But there is going to come in a time where you realize no one can take away what you know.
Yes. That's why there's a lot of cultures, persecuted cultures, you might say that the Jewish historically, the Chinese, the others, over
Greeks.
Periods of history. Yes, Greeks as well. They will always spend a huge amount on education because it's something no one can take away from you. They can take everything else, but they can't take away what you know.
Yeah. And I think that also gives us confidence. The more you know, I was going to quote Oprah at one point too and say, if you know better, you do better. But the more you know, the more confident you're going to come in. And that's why for me, I'm always grateful if I have a question, I'm able to ask you and you're there supplying the information. You have no idea how invaluable, I'm sure you do, but I just want to say it, how invaluable sharing your knowledge with others is. It gives us wings. I'm just full of them. I'm full of all these sayings today.
You are. You're very eloquent.
But back to this is, from my perspective and from what I know, and again, at the beginning stages, I feel that the pressure of naming and shaming, the pressure from NGOs, people who have nothing to do with government, is pushing the direction of what the parties are going to do instead of what the parties need to do for the people. So we look at New Zealand being given the golden
dirty ashtray.
Sorry, dirty. I'm making it pretty. The dirty ashtray award. And, but I'm thinking you are shaming and naming them because they're not doing what you want them to do, but they're doing what's best for the people. Doesn't that go against what's in there? Yes. And I say in there, meaning the articles in this.
Yes, it certainly does. And I mean, having sat through the 6 INBs, that's the intergovernmental negotiating bodies to create the FCTC, and then, almost all of the COPs since then, in those early days when, you were, the public gallery was open and you could sit in there and listen and watch. Every day there would be a dirty ashtray award and an orchid award for the good country. They also had they called them the Marlboro Man Award, which was for the one that was sort of supposed to be most likened to supporting the tobacco industry. And it kind of started out amusing because you sort of looked to see, who would have won it. But now I think it's just become really despicable because it really puts pressure on a country that is willing to stand up behind the science and evidence into a shamed situation. And I think that's what makes it so hard for governments to stand out and say something positive, because they know as soon as they do, they're going to be named and shamed. And that's why, in my view, it's a government does it reluctantly or won't join in the consent or the views of others. I'm excited or interested or hoping that at this COP, some other governments that have a story of harm reduction to tell, like Sweden, like Japan, get behind New Zealand and St Kitts and Nevis and others that have spoken about tobacco harm reduction, because the more countries that do or feel confident enough to stand up, the more these things will happen, because it can only happen with national governments. The WHO can't actually make any decisions itself. It's only it's a conference of parties. That's parties to the treaty. That's governments that have ratified or acceded to the treaty. But of course, they're under huge pressure, especially the developing world, Africa and Latin America and other places where they're dependent a lot of the time on WHO funding. So they, for a whole lot of other reasons, not just to do with this topic. So they're reluctant to go against the WHO's pressure, even though, it's their own view. But I think back in the day when I used to work diplomatically for Australia, Australia worked very closely with New Zealand. We're next door to them, as well as Norway. It was called WEOG, Western Europe and other groups. So Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, and that was pretty much the grouping, because Europe was deemed as one and the US were the other. They were the two sort of big powers in the original day, or even on other human rights treaties and things that I was involved with when I was in the government. And they were sort of more like-minded, but Australia and Canada, Canada definitely, Australia definitely, and New Zealand were all countries that would speak out, because we had a history of rights. We had a history of, democracy and, the way things should be done. And so we were very able to speak out. I'm not saying on the FCTC we did that, but now that, because I wasn't involved from the government side at that, but on the rights of women, the rights of Indigenous peoples, all those other things, we were out there. But I think the fact that New Zealand has come out here at COP11 and has made in its opening statement support for tobacco harm reduction, it's doing that. I mean, Australia said actually Australia's intervention in the opening statement, it didn't really mention anything about reduced risk products as far as I can recall having listened to it. But we know what's happening in Australia, and we know it's the opposite of New Zealand. But I think the reason why New Zealand is speaking up is because it has seen its policies, its national policies, are actually having an effect. And I think it said that its smoking rate is down to 6.2%, which over the last sort of 10 years has been quite dramatic, and that's because they've embraced harm reduction policies. So it of course, New Zealand has to speak up, but New Zealand will do that. Now, will Japan and will Sweden? They've got equally good stories, but I've noticed Japan, it during the FCTC negotiations, because it has a tobacco industry and a state-owned industry in some respect, it would often speak up for things that were important to that, and it wouldn't, especially on product issues, and it wouldn't get any support from anyone else. So Japan, maybe culturally, but it would back down, and it would just sort of, whereas a New Zealand or a Canada, we were less reluctant culturally to back down. So I think Sweden also, because it's within the European Union, it's part of a collective when it goes forward. It didn't join the European Union in the 70s unless it was able to keep snus. Yeah. And I think maybe this time around, and I was speaking to the Swedish woman here at our conference who was saying that there is a difference between COP10 and COP11 in the Swedish view. She felt because consumers, because science, because everything has been so strong with the politicians, that they may do or say something, but we're yet to see. And by the end of the week, we'll, I guess, know, depending on what happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jeannie, I want to say thank you because we can talk about this. We can do like a 2-hour podcast.
We could.
Where are you living now? Australia?
No, UK.
Well, maybe if I come down to UK and I find some equipment, we'll do like a full on like 2 hours together. If you
I'd be
want to
happy
talk
to.
I
Yes.
know. I feel like I could talk to you for hours.
The only thing is I'm getting so much, older. It's 20 years and I kind of keep thinking I should write all these things down. I can recall so much, but,
Just record it for now.
I probably should, shouldn't I?
You have a phone, right?
Yes.
You have a smartphone?
Yes.
Pull out your voice recorder and just record them as you go. When you have an idea, when you have a thought, when you have a memory, because these are the things, and then you can transcribe them and write your book.
Yeah.
There you go. I'm full of ideas today. I want to say thank you, Ms. Jeannie Cameron, for joining us,
Maria,
on Good Cop 2.0, the podcast. And guys, thank you for listening. And if there's anything that you can take away from this, is learn as much as you can about how your products are going to, who and how people are going to keep your products available to you or take them away.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.